How did an English cultural icon that went by the name of Ziggy Stardust in 1972 come to collaborate with one of the most prominent figures of American industrial music in the 1990s? Despite coming from two completely different worlds, they would not only end up touring together, but Trent Reznor would also work with David Bowie to produce one of the most interesting songs of the decade. I'm Afraid of Americans is the song in question, which is accompanied by what can only be described as a rather creepy music video in which Trent Reznor can be seen chasing David Bowie through the busy streets of New York City. Born in Brixton, London, 2 years after the end of World War II in 1947, David Bowie would discover rock and roll music thanks to Elvis Presley around 1956 after releasing his first studio record that featured the now iconic hit Blue Suede Shoes. Don't you step on my blue suede shoes. Bowie formed his first band in 1962 called the Conrads, and soon informed his parents he fully intended to become a pop star, which in the 60s really wasn't a normal career choice for a young boy. He would leave the band concept behind and go solo, releasing his debut studio album in 1967. At the time, there really wasn't anything even remotely special about this record, or even David Bowie. He looked like your average English kid, and the songs themselves were, well, definitely not what you would commonly associate with the creative capability of the David Bowie that we know of today. With songs like Uncle Arthur, Sal Me a Coat, and She's Got Medals, it was safe to say that Bowie was yet to find his true calling in the world of music.
Uncle Arthur still reads comics. Uncle Arthur follows Sal Me a Coat with buttons of silver. He went and joined the army, passed the medical. Don't ask me how it's done.
In 1969, though, his path would become clear with the release of Space Oddity. A song that quite literally imagines what it's like to travel through space. It was a smash hit and got Bowie into the UK charts. And just a couple of years later, in 1972, Bowie would explore identity, or rather adopt a new identity, in the form of Ziggy Stardust.
And I've always just seemed to collect personalities, ideas.
The rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars would be Bowie's fifth studio record, released in 1972, and is widely seen as his masterpiece. A concept album that skirts around the idea of an alien visiting Earth to prevent apocalyptic events under the guise of a rock opera.
Lay the real thing on me. The church of the take this time away.
Whilst David Bowie was pursuing his musical career and creating otherworldly alter egos during the 60s and 70s, Trent Reznor was but a mere child. Trent was born in 1965. The same year, Bowie released the single I Pity the Fool with a group called Mannish Boys. Aside from his parents getting divorced when he was 6, Reznor's childhood wasn't anything special either. He was a Boy Scout, enjoyed skateboarding, and even building model planes. He also played the piano from an early age and even had a piano teacher. And whilst Reznor is well known for being at the forefront of commercially successful industrial music, it took him a while to really find his sound. Some of his earlier musical projects were, well, not exactly as dark as you might expect from the man that gave birth to 9 Inch Nails. The Innocent, Exotic Birds, and Slam Bamboo were just some of the interesting groups he would collaborate with during his formative years. Of course, the 80s were all about synth music and incorporating that electronic element into a pop aesthetic. In 1983, Bowie released his post-disco album, Let's Dance, which was a global smash hit.
Really meant too much.
And if you don't know this song, then it's possible you may have been living under a rock for quite some time. Critics would argue that this was Bowie at his best and put him at the top of the 80s synth pop game. Pop synth music would absolutely dominate the 80s. Depeche Mode, New Order, Duran Duran, and Talk Talk were all topping the charts and convincing people to have outlandish hair.
I'll say it again. It's my love. Don't you?
Depeche Mode, from a commercial standpoint at least, was arguably the darker side of synth pop music, with songs like Strangelove, Blasphemous Rumours, and Never Let Me Down Again, all touching on a slightly more gloomy sound. This was a pretty stark contrast to the more upbeat synth pioneers such as Duran Duran.
Strange love, strange eyes and strange lovers.
And then we have Ministry, formed in 1981 and fronted by Al Jourgensen. Ministry would become known as pioneers of industrial rock and industrial metal, and a huge influence for Trent Reznor. 9 Inch Nails would officially form in 1988, and Trent would release the debut record, Pretty Hate Machine, in 1989.
Just found everything.
The record would even enter the Billboard 200 chart the following year in 1990, which would be the same decade that Reznor would end up chasing David Bowie down a street in New York. For a music video, he wasn't just stalking him.
I'm afraid of Americans.
But how did the pair end up collaborating in the first place? Well, it was censorship. In 1994, 9 Inch Nails released their second studio album, The Downward Spiral, and from this came the now iconic single, Closer. And the music video itself for Closer would be banned by MTV for being too graphic. I'd heard Pretty Hate Machine, but it was just a passing interest, to be brutally frank. It was an interesting album, but I think inadvertently it was MTV's fault, because I saw the video that you had banned, and I thought, that's really good, that's a great video. What happened is that because of that, I then really got into what he was doing, and Downward Spiral I thought was just an exceptional album. In 1995, Bowie released his 20th studio album, Outside, which officially was labeled as electronic, left field, industrial, and trip hop.
So bye-bye love. Hearts filthy lessons. Hearts filthy less strangers when we meet.
For those that don't know, left field is generally defined as mellow, experimental, and weird, whilst trip hop is defined as psychedelic fusion of hip hop and electronica, which honestly sounds like a soundtrack to a nightmare. Bowie naturally would go on tour to support his new album. I was trying to work out the kind of thing I really wanted to do, and as you know, I kind of like to be quite adventurous in terms of what I do on stage, as well as on the music. I just on the off chance phoned up Trent's management as it happened to find out if there would be any interest in Trent working with me on the tour, and we just started talking. Not many artists at the time, or even today for that matter, would take such a risk on collaborating with someone that your core audience most likely doesn't even know exists. Realistically, how many David Bowie fans were listening to 9 Inch Nails or industrial music at all at that time? The pair didn't just tour together, they performed together. Mentally, what I put into it was, if David's going to sing with 9 Inch Nails, what can we do other than just sound like a cover band? Give a spin to it as something we can add to it, which weeds out a large portion of the music that was based on different styles. That seems to focus on some of the darker material. They actively tried to create an experimental show that was truly a one-of-a-kind experience for their respective audiences. Had it just been Nine Inch Nails play and David Bowie plays, it probably wouldn't have worked out and may have seemed rather strange to both artists' respective fanbase. And honestly, whoever would have expected to see David Bowie sharing a stage with Nine Inch Nails? What we seem to have done focuses on one pivotal point, where we both seem to have the same sensibility, and we sort of boiled down the choices of songs that we've done really represent the 2 points, maybe that we meet nearer than anything else than we do, and it proved really interesting. Historically, it's kind of interesting anyway. It gives some kind of thread, some kind of continuity as to why on earth we should be working together anyway, and you start to realize why. It's a situation of opposites. Even though we're working somewhere in the same area, we're actually very opposite about the things that we do. The official singles from David Bowie's Outside were The Heart's Filthy Lesson, Strangers When We Meet, and Hello, Spaceboy. The record itself was produced by David Bowie and Brian Eno. However, Bowie invited Reznor to remix a version of The Heart's Filthy Lesson. This then led to Bowie and Reznor working on another project, David Bowie's 1997 record Earthling. This record again had some interesting labels such as electronica with drum and bass, pop rock, and art rock. And it also features the single, I'm Afraid of Americans. At the time, Reznor was working on the third Nine Inch Nails studio record, The Fragile, which would eventually be released in 1999. This record was written during a difficult time in Trent's life, and he saw the opportunity to work with David Bowie again as a distraction. He liked his Earthling record and specifically asked if he could work on a remix of I'm Afraid of Americans. The distraction Reznor needed was to escape his own downward spiral. He was struggling with a crippling addiction that almost took his life. I was so deep in the throes of addiction that it was shitty, but it didn't seem that much shittier than a lot of other things. Other surprises that kept happening. You tend to accumulate dramatic bad things when you're in that place. My house got broken into. How did that happen to me? Oh, my car got stolen. Oh, I woke up in hospital. It doesn't sound that out of the ordinary when everything is shitty. David Bowie was so impressed with Nine Inch Nails that in 1998 he said the Nine Inch Nails sound was one of the most exciting things to come out of America, which is a pretty big accolade to be given by David Bowie, especially with Bowie being one of Trent's musical heroes. The interesting thing is, I think I picked up on Trent's work in a different way from a lot of other people, is that I firstly thought his song structures were interesting. I thought that musically he came from a very interesting place. He wasn't constructing formulaic kinds of melodies, and it's fairly radical the way he structures his songs. Secondarily, a lot of bands in America, specifically, had been dealing with the change in the sonic landscape of their records, but Trent was also applying an intelligent chaos to his music, which is, it's thin on the ground. Not a lot of people are doing that with a sense of intelligence. One of the most exciting things coming out of America, for sure. Rolling Stone named I'm Afraid of Americans one of Bowie's most essential songs, and was also nominated for Best Male Video at the 1998 MTV Music Awards, but tragically lost out to Just the Two of Us by Will Smith, which doesn't warrant any coverage. I'm Afraid of Americans, the music video, portrayed Trent Reznor as a New York cab driver, and the concept is simple. Bowie, a European, plays a man being stalked by said taxi driver and American in America. And the keen-eyed among you will notice that Trent decided to wear the same outfit as Travis Bickle from the film Taxi Driver. Taxi Driver, released in 1976, follows the story of Travis Bickle, a Vietnam veteran who takes up a job as a cab driver on a night shift in order to deal with chronic insomnia and loneliness. The concept of fear plays heavy in the music video for I'm Afraid of Americans and is played out pretty well by Reznor and Bowie. For Bowie though, the song had a much deeper meaning. I'm Afraid of Americans was written by myself and Eno. It's not as truly hostile about Americans as, say, Born in the USA. It's merely sardonic. I was traveling in Java when the first McDonald's went up. It was like, for fuck's sake. The invasion by any homogenized culture is so depressing. The erection of another Disney World in, say, Umbria, Italy, more so. It strangles the indigenous culture and narrows expression of life. So in fact, the song appeared to be more about the oppression of indigenous culture through the development and expansion of the Western world into other worlds and other cultures. Something that from a political standpoint today is an extremely hot topic. David Bowie always did have a very interesting and solid grasp on what he believed would happen to society and the future, and with art. Even in 1999, he claimed that people had no idea of the real potential of the internet.
It's just a tool though, isn't it?
No, it's not. No, it's an alien life form.
David Bowie and Trent Reznor simply had a unique way of looking at the world, one you or I will probably never be able to see, regardless of how wide we open our eyes, because these two men saw the world with their minds. They saw the world as their playground of expression. They manipulated what they could see into pure art. And they did it in such an interesting fashion that it's actually quite difficult to grasp what thought process they even went through. So I'll leave you with this rather thought-provoking quote from the great man himself. Tomorrow belongs to those who can hear it coming.